Most men are bleeding attraction without even knowing it. Not because they're doing something dramatic, no cheating, no lying, no obvious mistakes. They're losing her slowly, word by word, text by text, through something so small they'd laugh if you told them. The way they speak. Words carry energy, and most men have been taught to use the wrong ones at the wrong moments, in the wrong tone, from the wrong place inside themselves. They've been taught that affection wins, that sweetness builds connection, that if you just show her enough warmth, she'll stay. But what nobody tells you is that there's a difference between warmth that attracts and warmth that smothers. And most men have no idea which one they're doing. This isn't about manipulation. I want to be clear about that from the start. What I'm going to share with you today is rooted in Stoic psychology, emotional discipline, and the kind of masculine self-awareness that changes how you show up not just with women, but in every area of your life. When you understand how attraction actually works at the emotional level, you stop performing. You stop trying to say the right thing. You start simply being the kind of man whose presence creates feeling. That's a different game entirely. Let's start with what's actually happening when a man loses a woman's interest, because it almost never happens the way he thinks it does. She doesn't pull back because he was too kind. She pulls back because kindness became predictable. There's a man most of us know, maybe we've been him, who meets a woman, feels something real, and immediately starts pouring it on. He's available, he's communicative, he calls her something soft, something familiar, something every man before him has also called her. And he genuinely means it. That's not the problem. The problem is that meaning something and conveying something are two completely different skills. When you call a woman something she's heard 100 times before, your sincerity becomes invisible. Not because she doesn't care, but because the brain filters out what it recognizes. Familiarity is the enemy of emotional response. You could be the most genuine man she's ever met, but if your words land the same way every other man's words have landed, she won't feel the difference. She'll feel comfortable. And comfort is wonderful for a long-term partnership, but it kills early attraction dead. Attraction needs tension. Not conflict, not games, tension. The kind that comes from a man who is clearly present, clearly interested, but not fully readable, not predictable, not rushing to close the distance between you and her. The Stoics understood this better than most modern relationship coaches ever will. Epictetus said that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about them. Apply that here. You suffer in attraction not because she's pulling away, but because you react to that pull by leaning in harder, by giving more, by trying to compensate with volume what you've lost in quality. And that reaction is what accelerates the disconnection. The solution is counterintuitive. You pull back not emotionally, not coldly, but in your words. You become more intentional, more spare. You start to understand that what you don't say creates more impact than what you do. Now let's talk about language specifically, because this is where most men make a very practical, very fixable mistake. There's a category of words that feel like connection, but function like sedation. Words that were designed to signal warmth, but have been so overused that they've lost their charge entirely. You already know what they are. They're the words every sitcom uses when a man is trying to be romantic. They're the words guys text late at night when they're half asleep and half hoping she'll respond. They're automatic, habitual, worn smooth from overuse, like a stone in a riverbed. When you use those words, you're not speaking to her, you're speaking from habit, and she can feel that. Women are extraordinarily sensitive to emotional authenticity. They can't always name what feels off, but they feel it. The difference between a man who means what he says and a man who says what he's supposed to say is something that registers below conscious thought. It's in the timing, the tone, the slight hesitation that betrays effort rather than ease. What works instead is something completely different, not more romantic language, not more compliments. What works is specific, symbolic language that reflects something real you've observed about her. Not who she wants to be, not what she's told you about herself, what you actually see. This is a subtle but critical distinction. When you describe a woman based on what she's told you she is, you're just giving her words back to her. There's no new information, no perspective she hasn't already considered. But when you name something you've observed, something she radiates rather than something she's declared, it creates a completely different response. She feels seen, not explained, seen. Think about the difference between telling someone they're intelligent because they mentioned they went to a good university versus saying something specific that shows you watched how they think in real time. One is a compliment. The other is a demonstration that you were actually paying attention. One lands flat. The other lands with weight. The kind of name or phrase that carries this energy isn't cute. It's not generic. It doesn't fit anyone except the specific person you've actually been watching. It might be a little edged, something that acknowledges the complexity in her, not just the pleasant parts. Something that says, I see your softness and your sharpness. I'm not intimidated by either. That kind of reflection is rare. That's why it works. But here's what men miss. The word itself is not doing the work. You are. The word is a vehicle. If the man driving it is nervous, needy, or performing, the vehicle crashes on arrival. It's only when a man has done the internal work, when he's grounded, when he's genuinely present, when he's not seeking a specific reaction, that a single word can carry that kind of freight. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. What you think about constantly shapes your presence. If you're constantly thinking about how she's responding to you, whether she's interested, whether you said the right thing, that anxiety lives in your body. It shows in your posture, your timing, the slight desperation that seeps into your tone. But when your mind is steady, when you've done the Stoic work of detaching from outcomes, your presence changes. Your words land differently because they come from a different place. This is why the same sentence can create completely opposite responses depending on who says it. It's not the sentence, it's the state it emerges from. So how do you develop that state? You start by watching yourself. You notice when you're about to say something to get a response versus saying something because it's true. You notice when you're performing affection rather than feeling it. You catch the moments when anxiety is writing your texts and you put the phone down. You practice saying less, not because silence is some tactic, but because silence is honest. Silence means you're not manufacturing, and that honesty is felt. There's a practical element to this as well, timing. Even when the right words exist, wrong timing makes them meaningless. Most men either speak too soon, before any emotional tension has been established, or too often, until whatever edge their words once had has been ground down to nothing. Think about this. When something is abundant, we stop valuing it. Not because it's less good, but because our brains are wired to register contrast. What changes gets noticed. What stays the same disappears into the background. When you express something constantly, it becomes wallpaper. When you hold it and then release it at a specific, earned moment, the response is disproportionately powerful. The right moment isn't manufactured. You can't plan it like a chess move and have it feel natural. But you can train yourself to recognize it. It usually happens when she's testing you. Not maliciously, just in the natural way that happens in early connection. She's pushing slightly, laughing a little louder than necessary, saying something designed to see if you'll react. Most men either shut down or over-respond. The grounded man does neither. He sees what's actually happening. She's curious about his composure, and he responds from that composure. Calmly, specifically, with words that reflect what he observes in her, not what he needs her to feel about him. Then he stops. He doesn't fill the space. He lets the silence do its work. What happens in that silence is more powerful than anything you could add to it. Her mind fills it. Her imagination takes what you gave her and expands it. And when her imagination is engaged, she's engaged, not just responding to what's in front of her, but actively thinking about you, replaying the moment, wondering what you meant. That mental activity is what creates connection on her side. You can't produce it by explaining more. You produce it by giving less, more precisely. The Stoics called this restraint, and they held it as one of the highest virtues, not because withholding was inherently good, but because speaking from impulse was inherently weak. The man who could discipline his tongue demonstrated discipline in all things, and that discipline reads as strength, always. Now I want to address something directly. A lot of this language names that hit differently, words that create tension. The idea of being unreadable can easily slide into manipulation if the intent behind it is wrong. If you're using these ideas to control, to keep a woman off balance for your benefit, to avoid real vulnerability while exploiting hers, that's not strength. That's fear dressed up in tactics. Real masculine composure is not about withholding your true self. It's about developing a self worth presenting. It's about doing the internal work so that when you speak, you're speaking from something real. The restraint isn't a performance. It's a result of actually having worked on your own emotional life, knowing your patterns, understanding your reactions, choosing your responses rather than being driven by them. When attraction is built on genuine presence, on a man who is actually grounded, actually curious about her, actually expressing what he observes rather than what he rehearsed, it doesn't need maintenance. It compounds. Because she's not responding to a technique. She's responding to something real that she can feel is real. There's a difference between speaking to a woman's emotions and manipulating them. Speaking to emotions means you're aware of the emotional dimension of communication. You understand that how something lands matters as much as what is said, and you choose your words accordingly from an honest place. Manipulating emotions means you're crafting an experience designed to benefit you, regardless of what's true. One is skill, the other is exploitation. And most women eventually tell the difference. What you want to build is something that holds up, something that gets stronger with time, rather than collapsing the moment she sees behind the technique. That only happens when there's no technique to see behind. When the composure is real, the interest is real, the restraint is real. When everything you project is backed by something you've actually built in yourself. That's the actual work. Not finding the right words, finding the right relationship with your own emotional life so that your words emerge from it naturally. So here's what this looks like in practice. You stop defaulting to habitual language. You notice what you actually observe about a person rather than what you're supposed to say about them. You speak when you have something real to offer and stay quiet when you're just filling space. You develop the discipline to let silence do work. You train yourself to respond from your center rather than react from your anxiety. And you give things time, including words, including connection, including the slow building of something real. This is the Stoic approach to attraction, not strategy, discipline, not manipulation, mastery over yourself, not performance, presence. The men who never struggle to maintain a woman's interest aren't doing it because they found some code. They're doing it because they've built themselves into the kind of person whose presence is worth being around. Their words carry weight because their character has weight. Their restraint is convincing because it comes from actual abundance, not manufactured scarcity. Build that. Everything else follows.